Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry. I'm here with Mike Simmons, and Mike and I had a conversation recently with Pam Boiros, and Pam mentioned something that was new to me, at least in the way she said it. Pam was talking about sending emails with the idea of why you and why you now. And that's new to me. Can you tell me more about this?
Yeah. So Pam and I, as we said in that previous episode, worked for the same organization early on in my career. And that organization had a person by the name of Jeff Hoffman come in and conduct a training. And at that point in time, he was with Basho Strategies. And the concept is why you now? And it really is a foundational concept that we apply from a catalyst sale prospect, or for me personally, that I've applied over my career when reaching out to or working to make initial contact with someone. And the equation is why you being the prospect, you being the customer, you being the person on the other end, why should you take action on this thing that I'm engaging with you on now? So it's me personally, why I've targeted you, why I'm reaching out to you, and why I'm doing that at this point in time, and then asking for something in return. And that ask for something in return is really just a recommendation. You're driving a high level of engagement in the why you now, because that's very focused on the customer. And then the ask that you're making is for their recommendation on who to talk to next. Who would you recommend that I speak to about X, Y, or Z? What's really neat about it is you're giving them context for the outreach. So it's not a cold email. Like I get these ones day after day after day. Hi, Mike. We're a lead generating service. We'd love to work with Catalyst Sale to do X, Y, or Z. Or we're a marketing automation tool, but we'd like to work with Catalyst Sale to do, again, X, Y, or Z. And it's always focused on them as an organization. They don't take the time to learn about us as an organization. And I think this methodology, this template, this concept really has helped me as a sales rep take a pause and focus on the customer.
This is great. I think of how many emails I get from people that don't know me and how they reach out and why. And I actually did a real quick search. I tried to find the first email correspondence you and I ever had just to see how you did it. But my real quick search in Gmail did not pull it up. So I would have to do a deeper search. But tell me, and the reason I was going to pull up that was just to have an example so we could walk through how something worked. So give me an idea of if you were going to send someone an email, how you would apply this in putting together that email.
Let's just say it's you. So let's say, Jody, I have heard you on the podcast that you do with Lee, and I've heard you on your own podcast, and I would love to learn more about what you're doing. Or let's say I think that a Catalyst Sale can help you in your business. Any one of those things. I would first start with, hi, Jody. I heard you on the Lee Cockrell Creating Disney Magic podcast. I was really impressed by the discussion around time management. It compelled me to reach out to you to do whatever that thing is that you're looking for. So if it's about me making you aware of what we do for Catalyst Sale, I might say, something like, it compelled me to reach out to you. Catalyst Sale or our business works with organizations like yours to do X, Y, or Z, to help promote podcasts to broader audiences. And then end with, who would you recommend I speak to discuss this further, or something to that effect. Now, Jody, I know you don't have this large organization behind you. So my who would you recommend might be a little bit different. Might be, what's the best way to schedule time with you? How can we coordinate schedules to have a meeting? But it's the thing that I want people to take away from this, or I want the customer to take away from this, is that my outreach is not cold. It's in the context of something that happened on the individual side of the business. So it could be a blog post that you were quoted in. It could be a podcast that you recorded. It could be a presentation that you just delivered at a conference. Let's say you're at a conference, you're at the Podcast Movement Conference, and you're talking about new technologies related to podcasts. I would say, hi, Jody. I was in the Podcast Movement Conference. I heard your talk around X, Y, or Z. I'd like to learn more about, I'm in the process of launching my own podcast. I'd like to learn more about what you're doing with this technology. What's the best way to schedule some time to talk? Now, if you got an email like that, how would you respond to something like that?
Oh, well, just right off the top of my head, I think, oh, this is thoughtful. This is somebody that actually knows who I am, knows something I've done, and is genuinely curious or has something that could help, something, along those lines, rather than the emails we all get so often that it's just phishing emails where you send them out in mass and I don't even reply to those anymore. Yeah. I used to, now I don't. And I actually found sometimes when you reply to those emails, even if you say no, people thank you for replying because they don't even expect people to reply.
Right. And the key there is you're not deleting it. You open it. So the piece that we've not talked about yet, which is really important in this process, and it works with picking up the phone and calling people. Dan Tyre talked a bit about this, about building rapport. That why you now on the building rapport in the Dan Tyre conversation is I'm reaching out to you because I noticed that you're doing something on our website or you recently downloaded something and I want to help you. This is not about, hey, I want to have a conversation with you and pitch my product. It's I want to help you. And that client, that prospect on the other side has the context on why that outreach is happening at this point in time. So in the context of email, the really important thing is that subject line. So the subject line that I would use in this scenario would be your recent talk at Podcast Movement, or your recent session at Podcast Movement, or your session on new emerging technologies in podcasting. It's, again, very customer focused. It isn't checking in. It isn't Catalyst sales service. It isn't request to connect. It's not any of that other crap that you see in those subject lines on bad emails that you send out to customers or prospects or initial contacts.
Yeah, great. I've focused a lot on how to do better emails over the last few years. And this system you've talked about, the why you now, I just had never heard that. I've got items that I like to do in particular, but this is something I certainly will incorporate into that. But I'll tell you one thing that I've always liked to do is, Mike, you get so many emails, and often what people will do, they'll put an explanation and then they'll put an ask. And so you've got to filter through that explanation. Well, I love, if I'm going to ask somebody, I love to just put that right up front. For example, if I was going to ask you, I don't know, to be a guest on my podcast, that's usually the first sentence. Mike, would you be a guest on the Jody Mayberry show? And then a paragraph or a few sentences about why I want you on the show. That way you don't have to read through the whole email or skim through it even to find out what I'm asking. Because if the answer is no, you know that right in the beginning and you don't have to read through all of that, the content that I included.
Well, people are busy, right? So why make your problem their problem? Your problem is you'd like to have someone be a guest on the podcast. If you start to make that their problem by putting out this big, huge description around the type of podcast you put out and who your target audience is and all that other kind of stuff, and then put your ask, you probably lose their attention early on because they feel like all you're doing is promoting your podcast. When really your intention was, hey, I'd like to have you join us as a guest because I think you could add value to the discussion. You could add value to the conversation. You could add value to the audience who listens.
Yes, that's wonderful. Mike, I know this episode is probably a little shorter than what we're used to, but I wanted to make sure we hit just on this point and make one thing that's really useful and actionable from this episode. So if a listener is like me, where this is brand new, this concept of why you now, how can we start implementing and being more mindful of this in the emails we send today? I'm looking for something where the very next email we send, we can start applying this.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would do is do a Google search for Basho and why you now. I mean, that's where you can get it straight from the source. When you talk about just the personal application, what I try to do is if I've identified a target, again, let's say that it's you, Jody, I'd like to have let's say it's Lee. So I want to have a conversation with Lee. And I know Lee's put his phone number in his book and he's really accessible. What I'll do is I'll first start with a search for Lee Cockrell in LinkedIn. When I do that search for Lee Cockrell in LinkedIn, I'm going to look to see what are some of the things that Lee is talking about. Are there specific articles that he's posted or published? Are there comments that he's made on content that other people have put out in the marketplace? What's he doing in his business? Gather a little bit of information about what I find on Lee on LinkedIn. Then I'll go ahead and I'll do a traditional Google search for Lee Cockrell, and I'll use some of the keywords that I've identified in the things that are interesting to him. Ideally, I'll find a quote. I'll find some thing that he's doing. It could be a quote related to a presentation that he delivered. It could be that he was in Coeur d'Alene recently and was doing a talk at an individual event. Then after I've got the information about kind of who Lee is, what's important to Lee, what he's doing in his business recently, I'll start crafting the email. And I may not have been able to, let's say that Lee didn't have a podcast and I wasn't able to attend the event. I might say something to the effect of your recent event in Coeur d'Alene as a subject line. And then in the body of the email, I might say, hi, Lee, you recently spoke at an event in Coeur d'Alene. You talked about X, Y, or Z. This is really interesting to me and it provoked this thought. And I'd like to do more of this in my business. What's the best way to schedule a conversation to discuss? Or would you be open to a conversation to discuss? Or how could we schedule that conversation to discuss? And again, this is all your own personal language. But the key takeaway here is do the work up front. You can't send an email. I couldn't send a boilerplate email to Lee Cockrell and have that kind of context and expect some kind of a response. So this is not I'm going to draft 100 emails and send them out to 100 people and see how many of them respond. This is, I've identified 5 people I'd like to connect with. I'd like to have a conversation with. And those 5 people might all be inside the same organization. And maybe I get a response from 2 of those people or 3 of those people. But that 2 to 3 people, we're starting to look at 40 to 60% response rate is significantly better than the crap you're probably sending out with the boilerplate emails around what our business does. Jody, does that hit the mark on what people could do today?
Oh, yeah, that does. And you'd be surprised. Well, you wouldn't be surprised how many since you used Lee as an example, how many just boilerplate emails that he gets that I'm just surprised people still do it, but it happens every day.
It's what's sad is, and we talk a little bit, I think we use the Ben Parker quote multiple times, which is with great power comes great responsibility. And the negative thing about technology is it's created a way for you to accelerate both good things and bad things. So, I mean, you look at Twitter, how many people are out there just yelling information? They've got this now megaphone where they can continue to put garbage out there and they're not really engaging in a conversation. If you're one of those people who's continuing to do the whole me, you're probably going to have the same results that you have today, which is not a lot of response. You might get 1 or 2 people who come up and say, yeah, I'd like to learn more. If you change that around and you start to focus on engaging in the conversation at the level that people are communicating at, on things that are interesting to them, learn their story, great success will follow.
This is wonderful, Mike. Hopefully the next person that listens to Catalyst Sale podcast and then follows up by reaching out to you follows what you've talked about today.
I hope so. That would be great. It would make my day if that follow-up email takes this approach. And we'll include links in the show notes to Jeff's work and some of the other stuff that he's done out there, because I don't know that we really did him a great service. We didn't get into the science behind the concepts, but we did talk a bit about how I apply it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Mike. And thank you for listening. If you want to hear past episodes of Catalyst Sale, you can find them on our website, catalystsale.com. Also, iTunes, Stitcher Radio, anywhere that you find podcasts, you will find us there. Thanks for listening to the Catalyst Sale podcast.